All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. Come on in. Welcome. So we're going to kick off here. And I want to say hello and welcome to the Product Expert Fireside Series. We're joined here by Maggie Crowley. We're going to be talking about building the dream product team from scratch. Maggie's got some great stories for us about how she's done that. Before we kick off into that story and exactly how that came together, I want to tell you a little bit about Prodpad. So Prodpad is something that was started by my co-founder, Simon, and myself. We were both product managers and we needed tools to do our own jobs. And essentially we needed something to gather the ideas that we were hearing and all the customer feedback and to connect it to the objectives that we were given and basically to tie it all together into one product management platform that just didn't exist. So we started building something and started sharing it with the other product people around us. And today Prodpad is used by thousands of product people around the world. So it's a free tool to use. You can jump in and it's a free tool. It's a free tool to try, not to use. You can try it today. We even have a sandbox, which is free to try out as well, which is a preloaded version of Prodpad. It has all the things like OKRs preloaded. It's got ideas and feedback and roadmaps, all this stuff ready to play with and interact with that you can try out, see how it all fits together. And from there, see how it works. We're product people ourselves. We'd love to get the feedback. We'd love to hear how it's working for you. Jump in there, give it a try, and let us know how it works. In the meantime, I'm super excited to introduce you to our guest for the day, who is Maggie Crowley. So Maggie is she's the VP head of product at Charlie Health. She is an Olympian. She was also the host of the podcast Build and has had lots of stories about different product managers and product people around the world and just has great product stories. Every time we've had a conversation, I've been on her podcast. She's now being on my webinar. Every time we have a conversation, it's always just great product chatter. And so today she's going to be talking to us about how she built the dream product team from scratch. Oh, Maggie, jump in with an introduction that fills in any of the gaps that I left here.
It's really fun to be on the other side of this and not being the one doing the interviewing. So I'm really enjoying this. And I think the one caveat I would add to your intro is that I am building the dream team. So it's not done yet. There's really only a couple of us so far, but it's been a really interesting challenge to go from a sort of hypergrowth scaling startup back to another one that's in an earlier stage and to think about if you were going to start from scratch on a product team, what would you do differently? What would you keep? What would you change? How would you approach hiring? What would your values be? I think for most of us, unless you're a founder or you're really early stage, a lot of those things come with the role that you take. And so it's pretty rare to have an opportunity to take the time to be intentional about how you're going to make your team and your principles and how you're going to work. And that's been probably one of the most interesting parts about the role that I'm in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really unique lens because if you think about it, most of the time, whenever you're coming into a role, we end up adopting existing teams, infrastructure, and products. If you're coming into a role as a product manager, most of the time you adopt somebody else's product. You rarely get to work on greenfield products. You have the existing tech debt and constraints and customers, for better or for worse, right? But working on a greenfield product it's just a set of freedoms with it that you just don't get when you're starting something from scratch. And it's really rare to be able to build out an entire product division from scratch, unless you are the founder yourself, which comes with its own challenges. But to be able to be brought in as the product person and being given the space, the permission to build something out is just a really unique situation.
Yeah, I think it sounds probably more exciting on paper than the lived reality of it, like many things. I think it was one of those things where I saw it and dove headfirst. Yeah, I'm going to do it. It's going to be amazing. And then 3 months in, calling my friends being like, I've made a huge mistake. What do I do? And I think probably the best piece of advice I have from so I've been in this role for about just over 4 is like, building the network of people that I had met, including yourself, which is how we got on this topic, was I phoned a friend and was like, help, I need to make a roadmap. I think having that network of people that you can tap to help you, to help you think through problems. I think it was a really fun challenge and it continues to be a fun challenge. But what I underestimated was how product almost never operates in a vacuum. So you would almost never be in a role where it's just you and not an engineering leader and not a design leader and not a couple of technical folks here and there. And I think what I missed was having someone just to give me feedback in a way that was like more relevant to the work that we were doing. So obviously there's other people at the company, co-founders, that kind of thing, but they're not experts in building software. And so they didn't have the kind of lens I'm used to having as my sort of foil for when I'm planning things out. And so I think that was probably the hardest part, was not having those voices in the room when I started and making sure that I could find people to talk to as I got the team off the ground.
Yeah. So how long ago did you start this process?
Yeah, I joined the company in October, and what's the reason why there wasn't a product team is that the team, and I think this is quite common in healthcare, which I'm new to. So if there's folks in the chat who have healthcare backgrounds, please chime in. But there's a lot of bias towards using tools and processes and other sort of ways of building rather than reaching for software. In my prior role working in B2B SaaS, the default answer to a problem was, let's build something. And in healthcare, especially in health tech, the default answer is there's a tool for that. And so there's just a different mindset when you're thinking about building, probably because I'm going to make a broad generalization. The sort of historical development in healthcare has not been about software. That's been really expensive and hard to do. And there hasn't been enough interoperability to make it make sense. And so they're just not in that place where that's the thing that everyone knows to do. And so that's probably why, or part of the reason why there's all sorts of a focus on tools. So you can get away with not having a product team for a long time, especially if you're validating your business model and growing sort of the idea. And so I don't think it's uncommon to have product join a little bit later. So what I've been focused on is, okay, now that we have this business, what are we going to build? What should the team look like to build it? And starting to do all the stuff that we all know and love.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you begin breaking that problem down?
Yeah. I think this is like the sort of classic product strategy question. And I think what's really interesting is a lot of people, and I think we've talked about this in the past, but a lot of people love to talk about product strategy. And that's like the shiny thing that we all want to do. But it's really, in my opinion, it's simple, right? It's just simple, not easy. So it's, if you understand where your business is going and what matters to the business, and then you do a really thorough survey of where your business is right now, then there's like a series of gaps in between here and there. And there's got to be a couple of those gaps the product can solve. And so that's what I did, was just trying to get really deep with the co-founders and where we're going. Just spent a lot of time mapping out what the product is right now, where the gaps are. And then given what our business goals are, there was a pretty clear, like, this is the right place we need to start. And so that's where we started. And I think given the stage, I would say I probably could have, in some other universe, spent a lot more time mapping out and then what. But at some point, especially when you're early, it doesn't even matter because you already know where you have to start in almost any scenario. And so what I decided to do was cut off that work and say, who cares what comes next? I already know we have to do this part. And so I'm going to go heads down and do that. And I'm not going to spend my time doing like a 5-year roadmap and thinking strategically about where we're going, because today it doesn't matter. And I think getting that balance right between like today and the future is another thing that was different about this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you can imagine in a different parallel universe, somebody else might have come in and just had this temptation to try to hire one of everything or get one of everything set up, try to do everything. And I guess it must be hard to resist that temptation. You've got nothing and it's, let's just try to solve all the problems all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think given that the products when I joined had been organically created over time, ideally I was like, okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to find the first workflow and we're going to build that workflow sort of top to bottom, and then we'll start iterating on it. But the only analogy I could think of was like, it was like a big puzzle on a table. And every time I would pick up a puzzle piece, the whole puzzle would come up with it. And so I couldn't figure out like where was the right place to start because it was all so interconnected. I think that's another thing. This is a principle that we had at my last place. And then I think it's probably from Amazon or something, but bias for action. Like at some point, you just have to say, it doesn't matter. You just have to get started. And I think that's probably the hardest part about this whole thing was how do you know how to get started when you have so much optionality? I definitely underestimated that how terrifying that would be. And I just went skiing last weekend, so this is also top of mind. But it's like when you're standing at the top of a ski run and you're like looking over the edge and you just have to go. And so there was a lot of that feeling.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we spoke about this before, which is this idea behind decisions that are either reversible or irreversible. And I think a lot of people get really afraid of making decisions. But I think the reality is most decisions are reversible. Most decisions, you can actually do something. And as long as it's not something that's going to materially change the business, there's small things. You can undo them. You can try something and undo it if it's not right for the business. And so that bias for action makes a huge difference in so many businesses.
Yeah. And I also think that I love that point about having the courage to make those decisions. And I think a lot about how there's a lot of pressure in a lot of our roles to be right. And I think it's definitely harder to admit when you don't know if you're right. But I think the way I handle that is always calling out when I don't know and being really clear about what is a bet and what am I confident in. Because no one really knows. And I think we talked about this too, like one of the lessons I learned from doing the podcast is that everyone feels like they're making it up all the time. And if you know that about everybody else, then it's fine to say, look, this is as far as I got to figure out what I want to do. Like coming back to that strategy question you asked earlier, I often find it hard to figure out what does it like sort of look like to do a product strategy. And the way I do is I literally write a whole doc that has every sort of logic step that I took to go through that process of like, how did I figure out what our business goal was if it's not clear? How did I figure out where we are today? What are all the market forces and things I need to pay attention to? I just write it all down and I try to explain my logic on every step. And then maybe I make a presentation if a deck is a more appropriate artifact for the team. But when you can share that level of logic with everybody else, you can highlight, I'm guessing, like this step right here, big guess from here to here. And I think that helps people, it helps you make better choices, but it also helps people have empathy for that you're in that position where you have to make a bet and maybe they have a better idea or maybe they don't. And then you can all just acknowledge, like, yeah, we're making a bet because we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually hugely useful to have, like that type of documentation for decision logging. The amount of times that even I've gone back on things going, we did this thing, but why did we do that? And that you've done it because you had some intuitive decision that you made, but you didn't actually write down how you got there. Oh, why did we come up with that? And actually having those logical steps and say, here are the assumptions we made, and here's where it was a guess, and here's where we got evidence. Having that would actually be hugely useful, like a repository of that. So I think it's probably a good habit to take forward.
Yeah. And if you've been a PM for long enough, you've definitely PM'd a product where someone didn't write that thing down. And then you're trying to build something and some code gets shipped and all these weird bugs happen because no one had any idea that there was 15 secret features that were unlabeled, like hanging around in your code base. So yeah, I think that's if you were to do it again from scratch, what would you do? And everyone I've asked that question to says I would document what I did more to avoid that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things that we do here at Prodpad is try to carve out space in everyone's week to document stuff. But the way that I talk about it is you're paving the path for the next 20 people who are joining the company, the next 40 people who are joining the company. It's not just for you next week, but it's for you 2 years from now or the junior that you're going to be training up.
Yeah, that was when I was at Drift before this. I was there long enough where there were features where new PMs would join the team and they would be fixing something and they would come to a meeting and be like, who made this decision? And almost every time it was me. And I got to sit there and be like, yeah, I totally did that. And I cannot tell you why.
Yeah, absolutely.
But assume good intent, I hope.
Yeah. I've been working on Prodpad long enough that I'll be looking at things like, who made this decision? And I'll look back and I'm like, oh, it was me.
Yep. That's the best.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, it'll be
It really takes the wind out of the sails of your team when you're like, oh, that idiot, that's me.
yeah. Yeah, new documents more. I've learned this now.
Yeah.
Team depends on it. It makes a big difference. That you're talking more about that bet mindset, that ability to take chances, take those risks. I think that's really important to get bedded in as a mindset early on. So did the company already have that mindset, or did you come in with that and are having to set the stage for it?
It's a good question. I don't know. I had never really talked to anyone about that. I think it's just how I operate because and maybe it's more unique to to product that there's so much uncertainty in whether what you're doing is going to work and how it's going to work because of the human behavior aspect of it. But I think a lot of the other roles are more, this is the task that we have and we solve problems and then we just march forward. I think it's been a while since I worked with a team where when a problem, like an ops team, or when a problem shows up, someone goes and solves it. And it's one person going and solving it versus I think the harder part was the team getting used to the fact that like when a problem shows up, I'm not going to immediately turn around with an answer. Instead, I'm going to say, oh, like that's really interesting. Where does that fit in with what we're working on? What's the priority? And then running a research process to understand the scope of that problem and to break it down and figure out how we're going to solve it. I think that rhythm was more weird for the team because they're used to like problem solution and not like problem in the context of more problems and then scoping and then research. And I think that process was more odd for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so speaking of a research process, what does your ideal process look like?
$1 million question. Yeah, honestly, we talked about this a little bit before. From doing the podcast, I have so much written down about this at different stages and what a good process looks like. And I think for me, what I've been trying to focus on is what is a good enough process that's not too heavy for the stage that we're at. And the hallmarks of it are always starting with the problem and really understanding the problem space and not making sure we don't jump to conclusions too quickly, making sure that we build in a good ritual for collaboration and making sure that design and engineering and product management are all sort of spending time together to understand a problem, really making sure we have a way to bring in our clinical team and some other teams, ops and strategy teams that we work with, which is unique to our business. And then making sure we start with a good understanding of how we're going to track the success of things. And that was enough to start. I don't think you need to over process your team. Right now we're a full-time team of 4 with a large sort of contract team. And yeah, I think that's like good enough. And then what I've been doing is as we just trying to pay attention to as like friction points come up and like people start to get confused, those are the signals I look to say, okay, now we're going to add in maybe a little bit more process. Whereas the team gets a little bit bigger, it's like, okay, now we need to add this ritual. Maybe we need to stand up. Maybe we need to Slack what we're doing each day in the morning kind of thing. But then I think the funny part is you can write down all of those plans and then you just don't do any of them and you just wing it some days. So there has been a lot of, yeah, that's a good idea. We should totally do that. But can you just do a sketch or can you just build a thing or just reality?
Absolutely. You run into this problem that you might get a process debt. You end up with different processes, but they're not getting followed or they're getting followed by some people and not by other people. And it creates more problem than not.
Yeah.
Any sort of thoughts on how you might tackle those sorts of issues as they start creeping up?
Yeah. I care more about, there's some rituals I care a lot about, and then I care more about our operating principles, honestly. So rather than focusing on, did you do every step of this process exactly as written? Yes, I want to make sure that there's a spec or a one pager that has all of our decisions documented. Yes, we need to make sure that we're collaborating with our different functional counterparts throughout. And we also need to make sure we're doing retros so that we learn from what we're doing. Like those are table stakes. But then again, what I care most about right now is momentum and building that momentum up. And I think the best way to do that is to have the team operating in the same way. And so I've spent a lot of time recently with our VP of engineering on what is that language? Like, what are our principles? How do we think about the worlds that we're building? And what are the things that we use to make decisions? And I think if the team got that really well and was really on the same page with that, that would help them even more than like, use this checklist.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And somebody's actually asked a question. What does, to you, what does a great product management org structure look like? How would you structure this?
I'm just reading this question. So
I would start with just the first one because I think there's
okay,
5 questions in there.
yeah, so I think it depends on what you're building. Of course, classic PM answer, it depends. So I would say it depends on what you're building, the stage of your company. But a lesson that I think everyone learns in some different ways is that you will ship your org chart. And so I really try to think about what is the experience that your users have or should have, and then making sure that there are people who can look across that workflow to make sure it's consistent. And so really orienting the org chart around, or the org design around, what are those macro like workflows, and then maybe building out underneath that if it's like much more complicated and a lot more work. So you could let's say it was a small product, you would loosely align your squads to like each user persona or user workflow. And then I love the like 1 PM, one product designer, engineering manager, and then a sort of smaller team of engineers working as like a team, an autonomous team, top to bottom. And so that's how I like to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. You'll ship your org chart. You ever heard of Conway's Law? One that basically states that your company will basically take the shape, your products will take the shape
Right.
of the organizational chart that's behind it. So your customers will eventually see like how your company's structured based on the products that you put out. And you see it with certainly larger companies and the way that they produce products.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And the most obvious one is that marketing site looks nothing like the when you logged in. And it's because they're two completely different teams, the two completely different design teams. So yeah, just that, but within the product absolutely happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Suresh calls it the mirroring effect as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different ways of calling it the same thing, which shows that it's just this huge problem.
Yeah. And I think that, again, this is a theme and everything I'll say. There's not a right answer. I think we're all trying to, if only someone would tell us the right way to do it, that we could do it that way. That doesn't exist as far as I understand. And so it's just about making trade-offs and like understanding where your team is going to get it wrong and then trying to deal with it.
Yeah, I don't think there is a right way because it comes down to the context of who's in the team, who's got particular skills, what's available, and also what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. Because we're not all trying to build the same product. We're not all at the same stage. We don't all have the same markets or goals. So of course, our org chart should all differ in slight ways. There are going to be some best practices that we can crib from each other, but it would be surprising if we all had the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And an example, a more concrete example of this is there are so many PM competency and level docs floating around in the world. And I feel like every product leader I know has a version they started with this company's version and then they added it when they were at this company and then they like added some other company's thing. And it's like sisterhood of the traveling org chart or like PM competency leveling matrix, ladder, whatever you want to call it. And that's an example of a thing that people just are continuously trying to get and always never getting it quite right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really difficult to, somebody's just asked the question, like, how do you escape this? I think, how do you like change the org chart? That's a really difficult question, I think.
Yeah. The way I do it is I go to places where I can do it myself. But I think just a real answer to that question is I've found curiosity in a lot of these like tricky sort of org chart, I don't have the authority problems to be the best method. And I think asking honest questions about why things are the way they are and just trying to learn and understand has always served me well. And maybe the answer is that there's a reason that you don't know. Maybe the answer is that's just because that's how it happened, and reorgs are painful in a lot of ways. And so it's not worth the cost of that. But I always just ask that question, right? Because you'll learn something, and maybe the current org chart that you're in isn't a fit for you. But then that's feedback that or knowledge that you could take to your next opportunity, and you can screen a company for how they have set up their org chart.
Yep. And remember, it's not always an authority problem. I'm a CEO. I have ultimate authority, but I can't just reorg everybody tomorrow. I could, but
I mean, you could.
They're humans. It's difficult, and you have to think about the repercussions and what actually happens. You can't just reshuffle people like chairs. They're not furniture. You have to think about how the skills fit together and how that changes how people interplay and how it affects team culture and all this sort of stuff. It affects a lot of different things. So I can see why reorgs are so awkward and so difficult, and not just the type of thing you can snap your fingers and do.
Yeah. Yeah. But as a manager, I would also say that a thing I try really hard to do is to acknowledge where those, like, when and where those situations may arise. So maybe team members are joining right now. I try really hard to say things like, this is what it is today. These are the reasons why we might decide to change this in the future and the factors that will play into this decision. Because another thing is, okay, you're the CEO. You have such a view that your team members don't have. And I think this, as a sort of person who's moving up in their career, you start to see other levels of what the conversation is and like why people are making decisions. And what I always thought was weird is like when you're an individual contributor, you don't know why those org decisions are being made. They just happen to you. And I try really hard to explain them because it's like, it's not the whim of a person. Hopefully it's not the whim of the leader, but there's a reason, and you can describe that reason to somebody and maybe that'll help them understand. So I also try to be honest about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the job of the product manager is interpreting, figuring out what's going on and what the motivations are behind various decisions, and trying to reinterpret them in ways that make sense. And sometimes they do make total sense. It's just that you weren't necessarily looking in the right places, or sometimes following the money, figuring out, actually it's tied to your bonus. That's why you're doing it that way. Or it's tied to a particular way that the business operates and makes money. But we were looking at it in terms of these types of user values, which didn't align. That's an issue.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a complete misunderstanding, or sometimes it actually does really help people understand things. But the product manager can be really helpful in those situations with clarifying that stuff.
Yeah.
And actually that takes us to another question. Somebody asked a question around how to manage the relationship with founders, sometimes who aren't keen on being active in product, or sometimes don't necessarily have the closest relationship or don't understand product.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been a really interesting journey for me, as this is my first time working with founders who haven't really built so much software in the past. And I think there's like the classic, I get this question a lot actually when I'm interviewing. People ask me this because they want to know, is it a founding situation where they're like your tech support, or are they really believing in product? And I'm obviously oversimplifying. They believe in the product and they value what you do, kind of thing. And I wouldn't have joined the company if it was IT support or just like a service org that just does what they're told. But what I found was that it's really hard to communicate what product management is to people who have never seen it in action. And there's a million articles written about this on Medium or wherever, but it's just like really challenging to do that with words, especially when you're remote. So you're remote, there's very little nonverbal communication, and you're saying words and there's nothing that they're seeing from you. And so I spent a bunch of time spinning my wheels on that in the early days. And then I had this amazing principal designer, and I went to him and I said, look, can you just spend an hour and can you like get your iPad or whatever, and can you draw 5 things for me? And I just I need this tool. I need something to communicate what I'm trying to get across. And so we just started doing these like really lightweight sketches on iPads and then like sharing photos with each other. And that was how we started to involve them in like, this is what we mean by what we're doing. This is why this conversation is meaningful. This is why we're asking these questions. And so I think just like moving way faster than I normally would have to sketches was the best tool that I had in my like toolkit in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think you're absolutely right. It's really hard to explain what product management is if you haven't seen it. And oftentimes you can't really explain what it is until you take it away. It's sometimes really hurtful when people are like, what does the product manager really do? If you weren't here tomorrow, we'd be fine. And you're like, you absolutely would, right? If the developers weren't there, nothing would be developed. If the marketers weren't there, or the salespeople, no sales would happen. Fine, we
Right.
get that. We give you a couple weeks, a couple months, you're going to start building just random stuff, and then you're not going to have a product that actually takes off and does great things. You still need someone doing product management, otherwise you're not going to end up with a product that actually solves real problems.
Yeah.
You need somebody doing the stuff. And oftentimes when you do have a team that doesn't have a product manager but still doing really well, you have a founder who's been doing the product management, or somebody on the team has been doing it, and they just don't acknowledge it because they didn't have the hat, didn't have the role calling it product management. It
Yeah.
makes it really difficult to explain what it is because it's a hidden skill set, I think.
Yeah. But I screen for this too, because I think I want to have a team that understands each other's roles and values them, because I think that's going to make for better collaboration and a better team environment when we value what engineering brings to the table and engineering values what PM does, and like design, same for design and engineering and design and product management. I think all functions have to have a really healthy respect for each other. And I think I would even go so far as to say like views the other skill set as like magical, because it's that like you do this thing that's so cool and you're like making something out of nothing. I don't understand it. And design, you're just like creating these things and you're like driving to solutions in a way that's really magical. And hopefully they can feel a little bit of that from product management as well. And I think that's the kind of interaction that I think makes for the best teams, when it's not only, oh, I get what you do, but I value it.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody actually asked about the opposite, speaking of teams who respect different divisions and areas. What about founders who insist on making all of the product decisions themselves? Get too in.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, you know what? I thought about this a lot in past companies, and I think it's really easy to fall into this narrative where you want to be autonomous. And there's a lot of stuff around how you want to have an autonomous, empowered product team, and you want to be autonomous, you want to make your own decisions. And totally, we all want to be autonomous. But at the same time, if you're working in a startup, you joined because your founders had a really great idea that you believe in, and they have a unique point of view on the market, and they know more about you, or not about you. They know more about the market than you do. Hopefully they don't know more about you. So there's a reason why you joined them and you believed in their mission. And so I think it's really weird when this question comes up, because it's like, why do you no longer trust that intuition? And instead I would frame it as, why are they bringing, maybe they don't have the right language and maybe they're not showing up at the right time, and like, that's frustrating, but you can deal with that. I try to take a point of view of, okay, what information do they have that I don't have? What am I missing that they're seeing that makes this thing that they want me to do so obvious to them? And so I think it's really easy to see it as like you could take it as an ego hit, like you got it wrong and they want you to do something different. Or you could say, they have different information and I want to get curious about what that information is, because maybe then I would make different decisions too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if some of the confusion comes around, or some of the clashes comes around as to whether they're trying to provide insight as to which problems need to be solved, which they should have really good insights because they've been in there longer than you. They have that insight, as you say, or whether their insights are around how quickly it could be delivered and whether the team can deliver it and when they want it and that sort of thing, which all of
Yeah.
a sudden you're like, no, actually, I'm the expert in that. I
Right.
know how to deliver stuff.
Yeah. And then this might be a harsh take, but then I think that as a product leader, you're doing a bad job. If you're not able to manage that conversation and help them understand the whys of what you're doing and the whys of the timelines to their satisfaction, like that's on you. That's your job. That's your whole job. Whole job, but it's a lot of your job.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling with that, then I would look inward and say, what about your communication style is not working for this team?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the tough things about a product manager. You've got to manage both across downwards and upwards. And managing upwards is often the toughest one because you don't have any authority in that sense. You got to manage through uh, influence,
Yeah.
and you've got to sometimes make these tough calls and stand up for what it is that you know and believe in, which can be really tough.
Dude, yeah, I think I had actually an interesting one more concretely that I can maybe talk about where something was obvious to me having worked in product for however long. And like, it was just one of those things that I don't think if you'd been in PM for a while, no one would question this thing that I was talking about. But I had assumed that knowledge in the team. And the way I said something was like, well, obviously the answer is X. And there was a lot of, whoa, how could you what? And I realized that I hadn't had empathy for no one had the same knowledge that I had. And I sounded like really aggressive with saying those words, thinking that it was just like an obvious thing. And so had to take a step back and focus a lot more on how scenarios. So if you're in one of those situations, to be concrete, you can do things like, okay, great. You want to have, actually, this happened 2 weeks ago. You have this really amazing idea for this thing. You want it to be done yesterday. Awesome. I love this idea. I want to understand what the potential impact is. Give me a day. I'm going to go and figure out what it would take to do it to 3 levels of satisfaction. And then I'll come back and, okay, cool. We could do this. Here are all the things that we said we are going to do. Classic, like, this is the game board that we have. We only have this many people. We only have this much time. And these are the options. And my recommendation is X because of A, B, and C. But like, we can do the other one. And I've almost never been in a situation where like people aren't reasonable about that. And again, it just comes back to why do they want to have that thing that they're asking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is always something that I've always tried to do is bring them along for the journey, show them the constraints. When I first started building Prodpad, one of the first inspirations was a whiteboard that I took over, which was essentially a place where I took the ideas that some of the people on my team had and showed them in a very visual way when they came to me saying, well, I've got this great idea. That's great. Let's take your idea, put it on a sticky note, and then we'll help me prioritize it. Is it more important or less important than all the other things that we're thinking of? And I'd have them visually see as to all the other things.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'd say, this is the most important. Great. You can watch all the other things fall off the list. Right? And then go, oh, so there's still a lot of things to happen. Yeah. So you can see this growing list that I've got to deal with. I'm not forgetting about them, but you have to see that there's a lot going on here and we have to make decisions together. I'm not just saying no out of spite. It's the product management system that is saying, no, we can only do one thing this week and you get to choose.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the best way anyone does this. But at the same time, the thing I struggle with is how do we create like a positive sort of everything is possible environment and not just like a constant stream of negativity? Because it's so easy to be like, we have a million things, we're never going to do anything. So I think a lot about like, how do we keep that list small so that we can do things that come up that are good? Because I think it can be so stressful, at least personally, to have that giant laundry list of things that you want to do and then you never make your way through it. And it's just like a burden that you drag around.
Yeah. My take on that was always to flip it around and say, you know what, most of this stuff we're not going to get to, and that's okay. Let's just turn it around and say, well, what problems do we need to solve and why? And then we'll pick the things that allow us to solve those problems, and the rest of it, if it's important, it'll come off that list and into here. And the rest of it, don't just ignore it for now. And if it's important, we'll pick it out. And that way you're working with a much smaller subset of things that solve problems and things that don't solve problems. And people keep talking about the stuff that doesn't solve problems. Unless you can identify where it's going to solve a problem, then it doesn't get onto the smaller list, which I call a roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my old bosses, Craig, for those of you who might know him from the podcast, I remember very vividly it was like week 1 of working with him many moons ago. And I was like trying to do a really good job and like keeping track of everything I was doing. And he said, just don't worry about it. And I'm looking at him like, no, I have all these ideas. I have to keep track of them. And if it's a good idea, you'll remember it. And I just was like, I cannot believe you're telling me to just delete this list of things that's my precious baby. And he was like, yeah, it's a good idea. It'll come back around. Like, you'll never forget the really good ideas. And I still to this day struggle with it a little bit, but I think it was some of the best advice I got.
All right. Yeah. No, I remember hearing that advice too. If it's a good idea, you'll remember it. And I remember that absolutely paining me because I don't remember anything. I have ADHD. So I don't remember even good ideas, brilliant ideas pass me by. So if I don't write it down, it's gone. And so I think
Okay.
Prodpad was partly a coping mechanism of, no, write it down, even if it's bad, good, whatever it is. And that way it helps the good things float to the top.
That's okay. That's a good balance
Yeah, it was.
to what I was saying.
Yeah. So don't always assume that you'll remember it, depending on your neurological state of mind. We were talking a little bit about the delivery side of things. Like in your dream team, are delivery managers required? How do you split that role with the product manager and that side of things?
Yeah. Hot take, maybe. Don't know. I've never worked in an environment where that is a split. And I think this is, again, a very, I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't understand it because to me, you're taking away the accountability of the team to be responsible for their own work. And so I think the PM has to be like a PM's job is not to ship software or whatever. A PM's job is to create business and the right business value, however that shows up. And so they have to be accountable to the impact that they're making. And at the same time, an engineering team is accountable for their work. So I think having another way to say this, or when I hear you say that, what I think is a PM who's helping project manage the engineering delivery. And to me, that's strange because it's like the PM is not the person who's doing that work. And we should all be responsible for our own work. And so we should be responsible for getting our work done on time. And so I had this conversation with our VP of engineering last week about who is the person who's responsible for hitting the deadline once it goes into build. And that's like the engineers and the engineering manager and ultimately the head of engineering, because that's us being responsible for our own jobs. And so I feel really strongly about that because you can't have, to go back to our earlier thread about autonomy, you can't have autonomy without accountability. And so you have to build an accountability in your team to make it all run properly.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I've got a story for you going way back in my career when I was a product manager and the team had grown quite a lot, right? It'd taken on funding. We'd hired a whole bunch of people and the team was just in kind of chaos. And so the CEO hired in a scrum master who went by the book, right? This person came in and just did everything by the book. And he took the dev team and broke it up into 4 squads and basically had them do scrum sprints for the next 2, 3 sprints. And I've never seen a dev team get snapped into shape so quickly and deliver so much stuff so quickly and yet deliver no value whatsoever. Because the stuff that they were doing, they totally disempowered me. Like I had no say.
I know you're meant to be like, and it worked. And I was like, oh no, am I wrong?
No. I just sat there and be like, what are you all working on? This isn't what we needed. They just worked on whatever the scrum master said. I'm like, that's not what was needed at all. Like we're supposed to be working together here. No. So you needed to have the alignment towards the goals first and then work on the functional delivery next. But instead they optimized for the other first, which did not bode well.
Yeah. I also think when I hear stories like that there's this like pernicious narrative about engineers not being fully formed human beings who can have judgment about the impact that they're trying to make. And I think shielding an engineering team from the point of what they're doing is such a weird thing. And they're like, of course they want to know why what they're doing matters. And of course they should be involved in that decision. And of course they should understand the choices that they're making and how those are going to relate back to users. And I think it can take time and be onerous to make sure everyone has that context. But I think the more you can do that, the better your product is going to be because they can make good decisions at the margin when they're building. And they're like, I think engineering leader I worked with in the past, he always said, engineers are creative problem solvers. So treat them as such and they'll do great work. And so that's a foundational principle that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. As Marty Kagan, who said, if you're only using your engineering for coding, you're wasting half the talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, there's a good question here from Sharik Manji, who said, in what ways can a junior PM fit into a product team if they're not yet able to take ownership of the product?
Yeah, I was just talking about this with someone on the team this morning. I think the challenge about hiring PMs, designers, engineers without any experience is that you you have to have enough people around them to coach and mentor and help. And so it can be really hard at an early stage to hire someone without experience because you don't have enough time to give them what they need to be successful. And so I think it always hurts my heart when I have to say no to people who are really early in their careers right now, just because I want to do that, but I don't have enough time to be a coach and mentor for everybody. But I think if your team is a little bit bigger and can take on a junior PM, I think the way I've seen it work really well is when you have a really nicely defined and scoped problem that's like has relatively clear steps. So if you think about the career ladder as growing in your level of ambiguity that you can handle, the level of scope you can handle, and how much impact you can make on your own, finding like important, like not silly, not make work, but really important stuff that's relatively well defined that has some simple research needs and just like trusting people to do the PM job with some oversight on their own. And that's, I think, the best way to help people come on board. And there's always like research tasks and there's like documentation that needs to happen and other things where PMs can pitch in and learn. But I think that like I would only hire a PM and give them PM work. I would never really hire a PM and not give them a full product, even if it's a tiny one.
That makes sense. I like that. And so where does testing and QA fit into your dream team?
Good question. So full disclosure, I have never really, only briefly have I worked in an org where there was a strong, like a QA team. So I've only really worked in environments where the team does their own QA for the most part. And there's obviously lots of challenges with that. But I think, again, it comes back to speed and accountability. And I like that. I really like it when the team is responsible for their own work and has to make sure that it works. I think there's a really weird dynamic when you can finish something and that finished thing is not functional. And so again, I think it comes back to whatever system is going to make sure that we're accountable for our own work and help us ship good software is what I want to do. And I would also hopefully have a strong engineering counterpart that has a point of view on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And what about user testing? So the other end up front.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just all the time, all day, as many ways as you can. Is the way I would think about it. I think, Teresa Torres, I think she has like the best models on this. And there's lots of books written about how to do user research effectively. And I think for me, it's really about making sure I have a system where I can, or the team can connect with users all the time. And so whether that's, you need to have a good group of people that you can talk to ad hoc, you need to have structured user research, you need to have really good data coming in. I think just like baseline, have that happening all the time. And then always make sure, another part of this is making sure that in our principles and in our language, we have ways to make sure that we're being specific about users. So a trick, I always try to be like tactical. A trick that I use as a leader on a product team is when someone says, and I know Eliana's in the audience, I've done this to her, so hopefully she's going to laugh at this. When someone says, our users want X, you have to ask which users, how many users, what did they say? Can I see your notes? Like, you just have to be really specific about it. And that helps your team really get in there and like really talk to the people and really learn, because you don't want them to be making generalizations.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like, as much as you can, talk to users and then make sure you're being really specific about how you're using that information.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a habit in teams all the time where they say that a bunch of people have asked for something, but in reality, they lost track of who this bunch of people are. It's
only a bunch of people.
Yeah, and it lives, in fairness, it lives in probably some sort of CRM somewhere, or it's lore passed on from a bunch of salespeople, and probably there were a bunch of people who have asked for it, but that information has been lost along the way as to who asked for it and specifically what they asked for. And then there's this game of operator where, when one person asks for something and then it gets passed around. And so by the time the thing is actually built, you end up building something that's maybe adjacent to what they needed. And they asked for problem A to be solved, but you solved problem, B. slightly different problem. And by the time you actually get it out there and launched, you've forgotten who the person was. And so your marketing team just launches it out to everybody. They just tell the world. They just put it out there as a blog post or a press release or something like that. And then the person who asked for this in the first place never actually knows that you actually solved the problem.
Yep.
So you just end up in this cycle of constantly shipping features. It's a feature factory. And your customers don't even know that you're trying to be user focused, even though it sounds like it feels like internally you're constantly shipping what the users are asking for. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a hard topic because it has to be woven throughout every step of what you do, I think, to do it really well and to be truly like customer focused or user focused or whatever. And that's why I keep coming back to language, because I think when it's part of your language, like when you're starting from scratch, then it just becomes part of your culture, if that makes sense. And so that's why I think about even more than just making sure that we're doing user testing, and generative user research and user testing. It's just making sure that we talk about it all the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like actually sharing it with people in a team, and again, bring them onto the journey, making the product management and the research part more transparent.
Yeah, and to that point, my suggestion would be record them and post them. Do a user research session, even if it's a casual chat with a person who's a user. Record it, upload it. What I do is I record onto my laptop, I upload to Loom, I post it in Slack, and I write my 2 takeaways. Like, it's easy. That's what I would do. And you just do that all the time. And eventually people start to see what you're doing.
Nice. Okay. I always like those sort of tool recommendations. And actually, somebody asked a question earlier on, because we're talking about decision logging. Any recommendations on how to get started with decision logging for a team that's not used to documentation yet?
I cannot claim that I've conquered this mountain yet, but it doesn't matter. Just write it down. My opinion on every tool is I don't care. Just find one and use it. There's no perfect tool. Okay, maybe Prodpad. Shout out. Admittedly haven't used it, but Janna, I'm sure it's amazing. I am using Now Next Later. I am slowly trying out this new model. But yeah, I would say like when you get started, the tool doesn't matter just as long as you're doing it.
Yeah. Basically, you can log this stuff in Prodpad, but log it anywhere that you can search, right? Anywhere that you can basically find it again later. Your team will thank you down the line. Just start writing stuff down and putting it places. That's the important part.
Yeah. I would say the only opinion I have is make sure it's cloud-based.
Yeah. Like email it to yourself. Honestly, it could just be you emailing stuff to yourself going, we made this decision because X. Yeah. Honestly, just little things like that will make a huge difference if you're trying to think things through. And also just the process of talking it out can make a difference. Just writing it down is talking it out, and you actually might clarify the points that you're trying to make to yourself by writing things out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just looking through some final questions here. Do you have any sort of decision matrices or anything like that you use?
Decision matrix. This sounds like a prioritization question to me. And the way I do this is really the same way that I do this strategy thing that we talked about at the very beginning. I think every prioritization gets really easy when you really understand what matters. And I think when you're caught in one of those like really complicated prioritization math frameworks, to me, that's a sign of a couple of things. One, you're not really clear on the goal, and you're not really clear on like the one goal and the biggest gap that you have to that goal. And two, you are not building confidence in your ability to make a decision. And I think those are the two things I see when I see really complicated prioritization matrices. And so I would always say, go back. Maybe is this where we say first principles? I don't know. Go back to what is the point of the point of view right now. Make sure you really understand that. And the more clear you get on that, the easier it will be to figure out what the right path forward is. So that's what I do. I don't know if you would call that a framework or just a process, but that's how I make decisions.
Okay. That's really useful. Yeah. And I think some of the best decision frameworks are the ones that are nice and simple, or things that people can understand. Nothing worse than a decision framework that people are like, I couldn't be bothered to follow the flow chart and mark it all down. It's more about just giving people an understanding as to how they should be logging stuff and how they should be keeping others informed about decisions.
Yeah. And the last part of that question, I just want to talk about really briefly. The decision by committee is a really good one and a thing that I think about a lot. And I think, honestly, like back to this question of building a software team amongst a company that wasn't used to it, probably one of the other weird things is this idea that it's not consensus, and consensus decision making will lead to like lowest common denominator bad decision making. And so bringing in the concept of a directly responsible individual or DRI for something and just saying the words out loud, like there will be times when I will take in all of your feedback and I will not do it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do something else and I will explain why, but this is my decision to make for whatever reason. And we just all have to like acknowledge that will be weird.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. All right. So time for a couple quick fire questions. A couple people actually asked about the sketches that you talked about. Are these anything that you have published and can share? Or is this sort of specific to your situation at the time?
Yeah, specific to my situation at the time, so I can't share them. But okay, let's say your business has an app and you were like trying to explain what an app is. You'd probably draw like a sort of phone-sized rectangle and you might put like nav items in it. And then you might send that. It was literally just an Apple Pen on an iPad, like drawing stuff.
Cool. Yeah. And I think that's really important, just like using visual pieces to explain what it is that we do and how things fit together.
One other one, we also use Miro boards to diagram out how information would flow around. So there's a lot of sketching around about, and then this information goes here and then through this thing. So.
Excellent. All right. And final question here is, when are you going to launch another podcast? Are you going to launch another podcast? The last one was so good, says Ricardo.
Thank you. I would love to do another one, but I'm gaining examples and fodder, I think, through this experience right now. And I think maybe once the team is a little bit more set up and we are a little bit more running forward together, I'll circle back to that idea. I learned so much and love doing it. So I would like to do something like that in the future. I don't know exactly what shape it will take, but stay tuned.
And otherwise, how can people find you? What's the best way they can find your writing or your tweets or your whatevers?
Yeah, just Twitter is usually where I'm hanging out these days. At Maggie Crowley, would love to chat with everybody. I try to share what I'm up to there. And I think right now I'm just trying to execute on all the stuff I've learned in the past however many years. So I'm not sharing as much, but hopefully I'll have more to share in the coming months.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everybody else here has as well. And thank you, everybody, for joining here today. You are absolutely welcome to join us back here again next month when we're going to be having another Product Expert Fireside Series webinar, this time with Melissa Perry. We're going to be talking about product ops.
She's the best.
That's going to be March 16th, same time, same place. See you all back here. And this session has been recorded, so you will be able to see this online in some days' time. Keep an eye out for that. And thanks again. Thank you again, Maggie. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks for having me.